In August 1945, across Canada, from Ontario to British Columbia, thousands of warehouses were filled with military equipment. Helmets, canteens, gas masks, boots, uniforms, backpacks, tents, and field tools. The war was over, but the gear remained. Factories slowed down. Orders were canceled, soldiers returned home, yet millions of items stood unused instead of disappearing. They entered civilian life for 2 decades. Surplus moved from government depots into ordinary stores. Canadians could walk into Woolworth Eaton's or local discount shops and buy real military gear for a few dollars. A jacket, a blanket, or a canteen became part of everyday shopping. This created a direct link between wartime production and peaceful life, turning military objects into household items. Families, farmers, and workers bought them because they were strong and cheap. A farmer in Saskatchewan used a military bag for tools. A fisherman in British Columbia carried a surplus backpack of family camping in the 1950s, cooked with army stoves because they were durable and affordable. The connection between military and civilian life was visible. Everywhere, warehouses were organized to sort clothing, vehicles, medical supplies, and personal gear. Some supplies were brand new, produced in the final months of the war, and never issued to soldiers. These unused items became valuable surplus products because civilians could buy equipment that looked almost new. Government auctions allowed businesses and individuals to purchase large lots. A shop in Alberta could buy hundreds of blankets, and backpacks store in Ontario could sell army jackets, mess kits, and camping gear. The quality was high because military gear was created to survive extreme conditions. Military surplus stores became popular because people wanted affordable items that lasted for years. Wool blankets, boots, jackets, tents, cooking tools, and backpacks quickly found new owners for many Canadians growing up after the war. Military surplus was just normal shopping. It was not unusual. It was simply useful equipment. A jacket was a warm jacket. A field bag was a strong bag. A camping stove was a practical tool. The history behind the object mattered less than its usefulness. During the 1950s, the system continued. The Korean War created another increase in military production, and after the conflict ended, more equipment entered surplus markets. Canada kept updating its military gear, and older supplies became available through auctions and surplus dealers. This created a generation whose first camping gear, work clothes, and outdoor equipment came directly from military stocks. The military-industrial complex had an unexpected civilian afterlife woven into everyday Canadian life. Surplus became part of homes, farms, and outdoor adventures. During the 1950s, the Canadian surplus system continued to thrive. The Korean War created another increase in military production, and when the conflict ended, more equipment entered civilian markets. Canada kept updating its military gear, and older supplies became available through auctions and surplus dealers. Small shops and local discount stores saw opportunities. They could purchase strong, durable equipment cheaply and sell it to customers who needed reliable products. A store in Ontario could sell army jackets, mess kits, and camping gear. A shop in Alberta could buy hundreds of blankets and backpacks. The quality was high because military gear was created to survive extreme conditions. This created a unique connection between Canadian military history and everyday life. A farmer in Saskatchewan could use a military bag for tools. A fisherman in British Columbia could carry a surplus backpack. A family going camping in the 1950s could use military cooking equipment because it was cheaper and stronger than normal products. The same equipment that had traveled through battlefields in Europe later traveled through Canadian forests, lakes, and mountain. Surplus became part of normal shopping for many Canadians growing up. After the war, military surplus was not seen as unusual. It was simply useful equipment. A jacket was a warm jacket. A field bag was a strong bag. A camping stove was a practical tool. The history behind the object was less important than the fact that it worked. Military surplus stores became popular because people wanted things that were affordable and lasted for many years. Wool blankets, boots, jackets, tents, cooking tools, and backpacks quickly found new owners. The system worked well through the 1950s and into the early 1960s, but changes were beginning. New military equipment became more specialized and was designed for specific missions. The simple, universal gear from the 1940s was becoming less common. A canvas tent from the Second World War could be used by almost anyone. But newer military equipment was often made for special conditions and had less value for ordinary civilians. By the late 1960s, the amount of surplus available began decreasing. Military production was different from wartime years. The government ordered smaller amounts of equipment and managed supplies more carefully. Many items were no longer released for civilian use. Some equipment was destroyed because it contained special technology or information that was not meant to leave military control. Other items were recycled or stored away. By the late 1960s, the amount of Canadian military surplus available in ordinary stores began to decrease. Military production was different from wartime years. The government ordered smaller amounts of equipment and managed supplies more carefully. Many items were no longer released for civilian use. Some equipment was destroyed because it contained special technology or information that was not meant to leave military control. Other items were recycled or stored away. The stores that once sold military surplus also began changing. Canadian retail was moving toward large department stores and discount chains. These businesses wanted regular products that could be ordered anytime. Military surplus was unpredictable. A store could receive thousands of blankets one month and completely different items. The next modern retailers preferred products made specifically for customers instead of leftover government supplies. Slowly, military surplus sections disappeared from normal stores. Shelves that once held army jackets, backpacks, and camping gear were replaced with household products, clothing, and new consumer goods. The surplus did not vanish. It simply moved into a smaller world-specialized army. Surplus stores became the new home for these items. Outdoor enthusiasts, collectors, hunters, workers, and history lovers continued searching for military equipment. They valued the durability and unique history behind each object. The average family no longer bought military gear during normal shopping trips, but people who wanted it could still find it through the years. Canadian military surplus continued traveling into unexpected places. Government organizations, firefighters, forestry workers, and other groups used surplus equipment because it was strong and affordable. A backpack made for soldiers could become useful for workers in remote areas. A military blanket could provide warmth in cold conditions. A field tool could become part of everyday work equipment. The objects continued living new lives long after their original military purpose ended. As decades passed, Canadian military surplus became more than just old equipment. It became a connection to the past. Many items that once sold for a few dollars became historical objects, valued by collectors, museums, and families. A simple jacket, backpack, or canteen could tell the story of factories, workers, soldiers, and civilians connected through one period of history. These objects showed how military production became part of normal Canadian life. Museums and historical groups began preserving everyday equipment because small items often told the most personal stories. A helmet or vehicle could show the scale of war, but a mess kit, a blanket, or a pair of boots showed how people actually lived. Each object carried memories of the people who used it. Many Canadian families discovered old military items in basements, garages, farms, and storage buildings. Some were forgotten for decades until someone realized they were pieces of history. A backpack brought home by a soldier, a jacket used for winter work, camping item that stayed in a family for generations. These objects connected private memories with national history. The rise of outdoor recreation also gave military surplus a second life in Canada. During the 1970s and 1980s, more people became interested in hiking, camping, and exploring the wilderness. Military equipment became popular because it was affordable and reliable. Before modern outdoor brands became common, many Canadians used army packs, tents, cooking equipment, and clothing for adventures across the country. Equipment created for soldiers became equipment for explorers, travelers, and outdoor lovers. Surplus gear proved its durability in forests, mountains, and lakes, and became part of the outdoor culture of Canada. The Internet later changed the way Canadian military surplus was bought and sold. Before, people had to visit special stores or local markets to find old military items. Online marketplaces allowed collectors from different provinces to trade equipment and search for specific historical pieces. The system changed, but the idea stayed the same. Military equipment continued moving into civilian hands. The story of Canadian military surplus is not only about objects, it is about how society changed after the Second World War. The connection between military and civilian life was very visible. Factories produced military goods, stores sold them. Families used them every day. The border between military equipment and civilian products was small. A soldier backpack became a travel bag, a military blanket became a household item, a field tool became a farm tool. Over time, that connection became weaker. The military became more specialized. Retail changed, and people stopped seeing military equipment as normal, everyday products. The items that survived became reminders of another era. Today, old Canadian military surplus can still be found in antique stores, museums, collections, and family homes. A simple canteen or jacket may look ordinary, but it represents a much larger story. A story about wartime production, about soldiers returning home, and about a country turning the tools of war into objects of peace. The military surplus sold in Canadian stores after 1968 did not disappear. It transformed, some of it. The legacy of Canadian military surplus is not only economic but cultural for Canadians who came of age between 1945 and 1970. Military surplus was simply part of the retail landscape. It normalized military equipment in civilian life in ways that seem unusual. Today, a child in 1960 might have a lunch bag, a bicycle, and an army canteen, and would not think twice about the combination. The military was not separate from civilian life. It was woven into it through everyday objects. This changed after the late 1960s, as military service itself became more specialized and less visible. Equipment that had once been neutral, practical, cheap goods became politically charged. Wearing an army jacket in 1952 meant you were thrifty or patriotic wearing one. In 1972 required explanation: were you a veteran, a protester, or simply someone who liked durable clothing? The object was the same, but its meaning had shifted. The end of the draft in 1973 completed this transformation as the military became an all-volunteer force. It separated from civilian society in fundamental ways. Military equipment became less familiar to civilians. The idea of buying military surplus at a mainstream store began to seem odd by the 1980s. Canadian surplus was mostly confined to specialized shops, collectors, and outdoor enthusiasts. Genuine surplus from the Second World War and Korean War eras became collectible and expensive items that once sold for a few dollars were now treated as historical artifacts, carefully categorized and preserved, yet in less visible corners. The old surplus system continued. Government auctions still sold military equipment, though the volume was smaller and buyers more specialized. Online marketplaces replaced local stores as distribution channels. Families cleaning out garages or farms listed military surplus on websites, completing transactions that echoed the old Woolworth and Eaton models. Military goods moving into civilian hands, finding new purposes. The deeper story is about changing relationships between military and civilian life in Canada. Surplus represented a moment when military equipment could move seamlessly into civilian commerce, when war production could transform into peacetime consumption without controversy. After 1968, that seamless transition became impossible. Cultural and political divisions created boundaries that had not existed before. Walk into any antique store in small-town Canada today, and you will likely find a few pieces of this history: a canteen, a mess kit, a wool blanket, items that once sold for pocket change. They are remnants of a retail system that no longer exists, products of a military-industrial complex that has fundamentally transformed survivors of wars whose veterans are nearly all gone. These objects remain because they were built to last. Military specifications demanded durability above all else. Equipment had to function in forests, prairies, Arctic conditions, and combat zones. That same durability means it functions perfectly well. Decades later, in civilian hands, the canteen still holds water. The blanket still provides warmth. The objects outlasted the stores that sold them, outlasted the surplus system that distributed them, and will likely outlast anyone reading this story. In the end, Canadian military surplus did not disappear. It transformed. It moved from mainstream to margins, from casual consumption to specialized collecting, from political neutrality to cultural complexity, silent witnesses, to a retail revolution that connected Canadian wars to its homes, farms, forests, and everyday lives. Canadian military surplus carried hidden social functions. It was not only about cheap goods, but about identity and belonging for many young men and women in the 1950s and 1960s. Wearing surplus jackets, boots, or packs was a way to signal toughness, resilience, or independence. These items were durable and practical, but they also carried symbolic weight. They connected ordinary citizens to the machinery of the state and to the memory of war without requiring direct service. Surplus became a bridge between generations. Veterans recognized the gear. Civilians adopted it, and young people transformed it into fashion by the late 1960s. Surplus clothing appeared in music scenes, in universities, and in protest marches. The same jacket could mean loyalty to tradition or rebellion against authority, depending on who wore it and why. This ambiguity gave surplus cultural power. It was both mainstream and countercultural, both patriotic and critical, both practical and expressive. In rural Canada, surplus gear was used for farming, hunting, and camping. In urban Canada, it was used for style and statement. The dual life of surplus reflected the dual life of the nation, balancing military heritage with civilian creativity. As decades passed, surplus shifted again. By the 1980s and 1990s, collectors began to treat it as history rather than utility. Items were cataloged, photographed, and sold in specialized markets. The meaning of surplus changed from everyday practicality to nostalgic artifact. Yet even then, the durability of the goods kept them alive in garages, attics, and basements across the country. Families continued to find old canteens, blankets, and uniforms and repurpose them for daily use. The story of Canadian surplus is therefore not linear but cyclical. It moves from war to peace, from utility to fashion, from mainstream to margin, and back again. Each generation finds new meaning in the same objects today. When Canadians look at surplus, they see more than equipment. They see echoes of national history. They see connections between soldiers and civilians, between past and present, between necessity and choice. Surplus is a reminder that war leaves traces not only in memory, but in material culture, traces that endure long after battles are over.